Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing another guides, tips, and tricks video. Today we're talking about the balance patch that came wrapped up in the Color of Madness DLC, and this is impactful even for those of you without the Color of Madness DLC, since this patch will have hit live servers and is now part of the Darkest Dungeon meta. This is the stuff you're going to be dealing with. It's a pretty long set of patch notes, so I'm going to do a bit of an overview. We're going to hand wave for some of it, but as a whole, we're going to try to get into the meat of what the game has, how the game has changed. So the first one that sticks out as particularly relevant is the crit buffs. Overall, heroes, hero items, and hero abilities have had their crit chances increased, and monsters have also had small increases in crit. I think this is really good overall. Plus damage was always much better than plus crit, in part because it's more consistent, but in part because the math just really favored the damage. The crit, the extra damage you're getting from crits just didn't outweigh the extra damage you were going to be getting from your solid standard damage buffs over the course of time. I really like that they've added this. I like any changes that add diversity to the best strategies out there are fun for me. They allow replayability, allow me to try different things. I really like it. It's gonna suck sometimes when you hit really bad RNG strings, either enemies critting or your guys not critting, but still, I think it's overall a good change for the game. Buff durations increased and buff ticking moved to the end of the round. What this has done, a lot of the abilities just last longer now, and they now tick down at the end of your turn, not the start of your turn. This is fairly good. Their justification was a justification I've been using for years, which is that a lot of times it's not worth casting a buff, it's just better to attack. And this is hoping to offset that a little bit while not over buffing defensive buffs, so I kind of like it. I think it's a good step in the right direction for that. Virtues can expire. Before, if you were virtuous, once you were virtuous, your virtue would be there until you finished the dungeon or lost. Now, if you hit 200 stress, your virtue will expire. I don't really think this change matters very much at all. It's extremely rare to be in a dungeon long enough where you have hit a virtue, stress has gone down, you've gone all the way back up to 200 stress, and then something relevant happens. So, sure, I guess this is part of their desire to not have people, or rather to offset the permanence of a positive virtue that you might farm for one of your characters and give it a chance where it can fail. I'm fine with that. I don't think it's a very big change at all. Tuned Stalwart and Courageous. I think those are both fine. Neither of these ones are particularly bad right now. Stalwart's pretty decent and Courageous is pretty decent. I think they needed to tune Vigorous, because I think Vigorous is a stealth debuff, not an actual buff from a virtue, but I think this is fine. The always hit threshold changed from 90 to 95. This is a big deal. Before now, if you ever had an accuracy, the accuracy being your accuracy minus the enemy's dodge, if you ever got that number over 90, it was a guaranteed hit. What this means is that your guys are going to be less accurate, and it's going to be more important to stack accuracy items. I like that on the one hand, because I don't understand what the point of giving me numbers are if these numbers don't actually add up to things. A 90% hit modifier should be 90% of the time I hit, not 100% of the time I hit, and it certainly shouldn't be a hidden modifier with that. So I like that it's explicitly talking about what the hit modifier is. It's a bit confusing to players who, especially new players who don't know this, but as a whole, I don't like a lessening of accuracy in the game. The game is about, to cite the opening screen, making the best of a bad ability, but of a bad situation. But part of the way you do that is through being able to plan and have consistent outcomes from the actions you choose. Overall nerfs to accuracy really require that you go back and figure out how to get that accuracy back. That limits my strategies, limits my options, and I don't like anything that limits my options that I can do. It makes a lot of items now impossible to play because I have to be stacking accuracy even more so than I had to the previous patch. So I like the added transparency. I really dislike the design decision for nerfing accuracy as a whole. I mean, as I said, like with the crits, that's one thing. Crits a gambling strategy to some degree. I don't want a 95% chance to hit, or in this case, I guess a 90% chance to hit to be what kills me in a mission because I miss 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 fucking 90% rolls in a row. And that will happen sooner or later. If we're going to be able to get accuracy to a point where it's consistent, let's not then take away 5% of that. It's not what I'm not a big fan of that change. Stuns and speed are too strong. Yes, the stun recovery buff that is granted is now increased from 40% to 50%, and stun percentages were reviewed and adjusted on some skills. I think both of these changes were necessary. They've nerfed a lot of stuns, but not all stuns in terms of their strength, so the percentage chance to apply the stun, as well as sometimes their the positions they're able to hit. More on that later when we get to specific classes. And they have given an increased resist buff to stop double stunning. Or to prevent double stunning a little bit more consistently. I think the double stunning buff is a little weak. I still sometimes could double stun. It's only gone from 40 to 50. Probably should have gone from something like 40 to 80. And I approve of the slightly lower stun percentage things as a whole. Stuns were too good. But I don't really like the restrictions on the positions the stuns were able to hit. And we'll talk about that more, as I said, when we get to specific classes. Stall detection improvements. This is a joke. The intent is great. Stalling was a extremely strong strategy for recovering health and stress towards the end of a fight. They were looking to lower that, particularly on some specific enemies. The opposite has really happened. It's easier to stall now than it has ever been before, and I don't think that was the intention of this patch. It just hasn't been implemented very well. Scouting got slightly nerfed. It was needed. It was overpowered. I really like this so far, by the way. As a whole, they're looking at things that were too strong and lowering them, and then trying to improve the number of other strategies that you can use to do things. Monster AI improvements. Supposedly, the monsters are a little bit smarter. I don't know that I've actually noticed that. Maybe I see it sometimes when I'm virtue farming and I see characters with very high stress, like 60 or 70, get targeted repeatedly with stress attacks on other characters not being targeted. But I haven't noticed that be such a big deal. It's not like the fights are harder because the monsters are smarter at targeting that I've found. So, smoothed out some power scaling levelings for veteran and champion. Veteran monsters would have slightly less HP and dodge, but slightly increased damage and crit. And champion monsters now be slightly weaker across the board. Okay, champion dungeons were terrifying. Do I need them to be nerfed? I don't know. I liked that champion dungeons were terrifying. I liked that was a big risk heading into champion dungeons. Okay, we're not gonna do too much with this is just a summary basically of what we said. There are a couple of ones. Actually, we'll do a couple of these in here. Crits now only heal for 3 stress instead of 4 because among other things, you get more crits. That's fine. All heroes and monsters previously had +10. That's now +5. We already talked about that. Heroes now trigger an effect on crit. This was a cool little change. Now a lot of classes have, all classes have it, but a lot of classes have very useful abilities that trigger for 1 round after you crit. So the next round after you crit something, you'll have a cool little buff. It's annoying how inconsistently useful that buff is. Some of the buffs are great. Leper has an accuracy buff. Crusader has a protection buff. There's a couple of buffs that are basically almost always useful or almost always potentially useful. And then there's a lot of buffs that are really fucking bad, like extra damage versus a bleeding target, or extra damage versus a marked target, or this type of shit. So it's very inconsistent how good those buffs are. I wish those were a little bit more uniformly good as a cool little perk that you get for critting someone. Already talked about that. Already talked about that. Stalling is still bullshit. AoE moves no longer inherently bypass stealth. At least one target needs to be visible to be able to use AoE moves. Okay, I've never been a huge fan of the stealth mechanic. I guess it's something. It certainly makes enemies more annoying, but it feels like it pigeonholes me even more in my compositions. If stealthing enemies are annoying enough, I'm forced to bring a response to stealthing enemies. Not all character classes have a good amount of ways to deal with stealthing enemies, which means I'm stuck bringing less. I have less of a repertoire of guys I could potentially use to have fun with, and I'm stuck bringing certain classes. This makes that more pronounced. You can still get away with it sometimes by targeting a corpse with AoE abilities and hitting a stealth character, but a lot of times you just can't hit the stealth character at all. I don't actually like that mechanic very much. Surprise chance is now a little bit more clear. Good. Heroes can only have 2 blocks, may only now have 2 blocks at a time. Sure. Healing buffs now cap at doubling healing. Okay, I think that's fine as well. So plus 100% healing is still fine. Stress damage now has a minimum of 20%, so you can't get to 0% stress taken. Sure. Positive quirks can be removed. I think that's great. If you want to pay the money to remove a positive quirk because you're doing something insane with your quirks, I think that should be available. That's super fun. Effect chances now roll separately. Uppercuts, move, and stun succeed or fail independently. It always should have been that way. It's a good change. Control effect of Siren no longer rolls against the debuff resist. And now just has a 70% chance to succeed. It's annoying that you can't itemize and play around that anymore. There's no counter strategy to the Siren anymore. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can build a party, spreading out the damage, for example, setting up buffs that only affect the enemy but don't affect your own guys when they're being attacked by your own guys. Stuff like that. There's still options you can have, but I miss being able to bring an Antiquarian on the Siren because the Antiquarian had really shitty debuff resist, and the Siren would always target the lowest debuff character and grab your Antiquarian. So I think it's good. The Siren was a bit of a trivial fight. She remains kind of a trivial fight, so it's not that big of a deal, but I have a mixed mind of how much I like that. Stealth is now a shader. This means everyone now can have a stealth effect. Sure. Okay. All right. Individual hero changes. The Abomination can now party with religious heroes is fantastic. It was a really bad restriction that made the Abomination nearly unplayable, mostly because the Vestal still remains the only healer worth talking about. I love that the Abomination can be brought out. The Abomination is a cool class when they can be run with the Vestal. Their crit effect is 20% damage. That's fine. Not amazing, but still good. Like when you're spending most of your time as Abomination in stun form and your humanoid form, the 20% damage is pretty irrelevant. But if you ever transform into damage form and want that, then you get it. That's pretty good. 2 rounds, remember, is not actually 2 rounds. If it says 3 rounds, it's 2 rounds because your buffs now tick away at the end of your turn. So the turn you crit someone, you get the buff. At the end of that turn, one of those rounds ticks away and you only get 1 round of it. There are some classes that seem to have 3 rounds. I'm not sure if it's a bug or a feature yet, but some classes actually seem to get that. I'm thinking the Jester right now, but I'm not entirely sure if that's right. We'll check in the patch notes. A small increase in crits, sure. Transform. Now usable in all ranks. Yep. It's good. Transform to human stress heal. Sure. Self-healing move from transferring human now heals on transforming to beast. Okay. The big ones for me change-wise were the reduced stun chance on manacles is a really big deal, and the increased crit on manacles is quite nice as well. The beast bile changes, whatever. Don't care one way or the other about that. The Absolution nerf. Stress healing as a whole in this patch got a nerf. I'm not sure why. I assume maybe in part to offset the crit stuff, but some of these nerfs were pretty damn significant. The Absolution one, not so much. This is still a combination heal, stress heal, still very good. Rake crit went up very slightly. Rake's been good all along. Probably the best of the Abomination transform abilities. Rage crit increases as well. Not relevant at all. You're so rarely in Abomination form on the Abomination. And Slam, again, no one really cares. The 2 of the skills, this might be relevant in future patches, so maybe it's worth talking about. Some skills are considered stalling skills and some are not. The idea is that if your party uses 3 or more, or I think it's 2 or more stalling skills in a round, it counts as it progresses the chance, it's not a chance, it progresses it triggers the effect of that was a stalling round. And if you do 2 stalling rounds, your enemies start getting reinforcements. In reality, it doesn't actually seem to work that way, so this might be relevant later, but it's not relevant now. Psych up cost from 4 to 3, now stresses other party members by 10, 20 if religious, rather than stressing out health. I like the decrease in the cost. I'm not sure that I ever would use Psych up on an Abomination. There's much better camping skills pretty much for everybody, so probably not that big of a change. The Antiquarian, I'm of a mixed mind of Antiquarian changes. Antiquarian is such a niche character that has such limited utility most of the time for the rest of the game and has no impact at all in the endless mode. I guess I'll just briefly skim it. Now it brings a skeleton key. Okay, 15% bonus to combat shards gained. Sure, crit effect plus 10 dodge. That's a good one for that class. Crit from nerf on the crit, whatever. Nervous stab, slightly less accurate. Festering vapors, slightly less critical chance. Get down. Moves down, buffs blight chance. I thought this had a limited number of usage now. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I think it does. Get down's the wrong one. That's protect me that I'm thinking of. Okay, now moves Antiquarian back, buffs blight chance, buff dodge from blah blah blah, buff speed. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's a buff you're never going to use on a character you're rarely going to play. I guess it's slightly better. Flash powder can no longer crit. Accuracy buff down. Oh no, up. Slightly better accuracy buff, still not worth using, I don't think. Fortifying vapors, now also buff, blah, blah, blah. Protect me, this was a big nerf. Oh, it's not even listed in here, and I'm almost certain it did happen. Am I just imagining? Almost certain Protect Me now has a limited number of times you can use it per round, but I might be wrong on that. Either way, I don't really care about the Antiquarian changes at all. I don't think it changes the game whatsoever. None of these are major changes, where a lot of the other class changes are fairly major. So I'm just going to wave my hands on that one and say long patch notes, Antiquarian, have fun. All right, Arbalest. Crit effect. Plus 33% damage versus marked is a fucking terrible crit effect. It's just so unreliable to actually get any use out of it. Whereas plus 20% damage is always going to be useful. You know, even if it's just for another point or two on a stun, that may or may not matter. It's still going to be useful consistently. This one, you're really going to have to play to make that useful. And I've never liked marks, and they're, in my opinion, even worse in this patch than they've ever been before. So I really don't like this. I think this is almost a useless buff that she gets, which is unfortunate because the Arbalest is one of the characters that you really ought to be able to find a fairly good crit build for her by stacking crit and then trying to take advantages of marks, and it still doesn't really do anything for me. She got a damage nerf. I don't know why. I didn't feel the Arbalest did particularly great damage ever, and the nerf is nerf at all levels of damage. I've played with her now. She's fairly underwhelming. She was never been great, but she's now noticeably lacking in damage, especially with such a large range. It's really hard to consistently get kills on the targets I want with the Arbalest. Crit, actually, despite overall supposedly improving, had a very, very small increase for her. Sniper shot crit had a very small increase. Suppressing fire is it's fine as an ability. You can run it in dodge comps in the regular game. But really what endless mode, what this patch added, besides a bunch of balance changes, it added endless mode, and we'll talk more about that in another video. But suppressing fire remains entirely useless in endless mode, which makes it, changes to it really uninteresting to me. It was so niche. Again, something you almost never used in the regular playthroughs, and now will never use in endless mode. Really not interesting to me at all. Sniper's Mark, debuff duration changed from 3 to 2. Really? I thought marks got a buff on their duration. That's disturbing to me. Sniper's Mark did not need a debuff reduction, particularly because the Arbalest almost never wants to be the one applying Sniper's Mark. She can't shoot position 1, but she can't apply Sniper's Mark to position 1. And she almost always wants to be the one doing the damage because she has a lot of extra bonuses to shooting a marked target. She rarely wants to be the one applying the mark. Really don't like that. Bola got its crit nerfed out of the ballpark. That's terrible. Bola was basically only good for fishing for crits and very, very rarely finishing off one creature while doing damage to a second. Blind Fire got a slight nerf. Too bad. Blind Fire was fairly good to make up for the fact she couldn't hit position 1. Again, this is another nerf. Battlefield Bandage now can target all positions. That's a nice quality of life change. Rallying Flare de-stealths all enemies and can no longer crit, which is a downside. It means you get less stress healing out of it. Not that you're ever using Rallying Flare very much. And now gives a slight stress heal to players directly. Also didn't like it. It's percent based and very, very small. Bunch of her skills are now considered stalling. Field dressing cost from 3 to 2. No one ever uses that. Restoring crossbow crit from 5 to 8. It's a very slight crit improvement to scale up with the rest of the game's crit improvements. And triage heal from 35 to 20%. Again, no understanding of why we're nerfing bad skills that no one uses already. As a whole, these are a bunch of negative changes for the Arbalest in a way that makes me even less likely to bring what was kind of a mediocre class to a game before. Really didn't like the Arbalest changes. All right, Bounty Hunter. Again, damage versus marked. Fuck off. We don't really want to deal with that. Bounty Hunter is often stunning, often casting the protection, the debuff for other people to attack, rarely swinging on people with that, and just not a good crit effect, in my opinion. The crit chances going slightly up, sure. Collect bounty, slightly improved. Actually, a fairly significantly improved crit chance, which is fine. Mark for Death now buffs his speed. I don't actually like the change of Mark for Death on the Bounty Hunter. So Mark for Death is one of the 2 minus protection marks. There's 2 minus dodge marks. That's the Occultist mark and the Arbalest marked. And there's 2 minus protection marks. That's the Hound's mark and the Bounty's mark. And minus protection is actually a very, very valuable thing to use, which is it's a helpful attribute to be able to apply to somebody. And Mark for Death does not have as much of a minus protection removal as the Houndmaster's one. And I don't really think the speed boost is worth that trade-off. I guess you can now use Mark for Death with the speed boost to do something like, if you're going last at the end of a round and there's one enemy left, you can buff yourself to go first and hypothetically remove it. There are some usages for controlling stress by controlling the number of enemies attacks, which helpful. A speed buff is a fairly useful attribute, but I don't like that the primary bonus of why I'm marking a creature and why I bring any marks at all these days is I bring the protection marks. And it kind of bothers me that the Bounty Hunter's protection mark is less powerful, and I assume it's less powerful because it gives a speed buff. So I like these abilities, but I don't like the cost I had to pay to get those abilities. Come Hither now marks target for 2 rounds. Sure, I haven't actually used Come Hither in such a long time. It's hard to imagine a scenario where I care. But sure, applying a mark in addition's a buff. Uppercut, accuracy went down. Crit went very slightly up. And the stun percentage from 100 to 140 is fine. Uppercut's the less good of his two skills, but it's okay. Any buffs to that are welcome. The Bounty Hunter is a little bit weak as well. Needs a couple buffs. This is fine. Flashbang can no longer target rank 1, which is a nerf, and stun chance reduced by 15. So now it goes from 110 to 150. That's too bad. Stun's got nerfed. This was one of them. It still remains his best stun. It's still the stun I use the most in the Bounty Hunter. But it's a little bit worse than it was. Finish him, crit up, fine. Finish him is basically just used to hit the third row and occasionally hit stun targets. I don't really care about the crit chance on it. If it happens, it's nice, but it's not that big of a deal. Caltrops, a shitty ability that looks like it was made shittier. Yep. Okay. Caltrops, the real use of that is the speed debuff. Sure, I'm probably never having that on my bar still, quite honestly. I'm probably ending up with the 2 attacks, the position 1-2 attack, the position 1-2-3 attack, one of the stuns, probably flashbang, and probably the mark skill. But maybe you could try to fit this in. It just doesn't seem relevant. It's just a skill that has no real place in my opinion. But sure, got a slight nerf in terms of damage. Its debuff stuff is still mostly intact, and the crit chance got nerfed. So a bad skill got worse. Don't know why. Stalling. This is how we do it. Cost from 3 to 2. There was some nice buffs on the camping skills there. Now his accuracy and crit buff is only 2 cost, which is very nice. And his scouting chance got slightly nerfed, and the overall scouting nerf. Overall, Bounty Hunter to me didn't get very heavily nerfed, but didn't get good enough to be played very often. So also a bit of a problem for me. Don't really care about the Bounty Hunter still. Crusader. It's weird as I'm doing this because what have I been playing since the patch dropped? I've been playing endless mode nonstop, and a part of me wants to just immediately go into how these changes affect endless mode, but I don't want to do that without giving a sense of how the characters changed as a whole. So I guess I'll keep with this and then maybe do a separate video for the endless stuff, and we'll get to that. Okay, Crusader, crit effect, plus 15% protection for 2 rounds. I like this a lot. It's not really 2 rounds, of course, it's 1 round, but I think this is fine. Protection's a fairly useful skill. It's not always going to be relevant because someone may not attack you, but it feels like it's just it's something that benefits me while not having to do anything extra, and the benefit is a useful benefit. I'm fine with that. Crit slight increases on crit, fine. Smite changes, slight increases on crit, fine. Zealous accusation, slight increases in crit, sure. Stunning blow, damage mod from minus 75% to minus 50% does a little bit more damage, and the crit has gone up. Cool. Bulwark of Faith protection from 25 to 40, from now to 20 to 30. So a nerf on Bulwark of Faith. Bulwark of Faith is one of those abilities which is super questionable. Most of the time in non-endless mode, you're not able to use that because buffs, even fight long buffs, generally aren't worth it. It's not worth spending that round, especially an early round, to do something that isn't stun or deal damage. But occasionally it's worth it in boss fights, and it's unfortunate to see it get nerfed. But 40% protection was insane, 30% maybe a little bit more reasonable. But in reality, I don't think so. I think this nerf was unnecessary. When you compare this to the Leper's buff, which is 30% protection, and like I think it's 25 or 30 to all the resists that matter, minus disease resist. This one is a lot worse, and I'm not sure the nerf was needed. Battle Heal can now be used from anywhere and target anywhere. Battle Heal is still not really worth using. So let's take a look at this one. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. So it got slightly buffed, 5, 6. Okay, it got slightly buffed in the early range and no buffs in the late range for the healing. I don't think it's worth keeping Battle Heal on your bar ever. It's not enough healing to be a main healer in most cases, and it's just not a good ability. Holy Lance upped its crit, sure. Inspiring Cry nerfed its stress healing. That's a really big deal as a whole. It makes the Crusader, who was already a marginal stress healer, like barely on board, able to do that. Could get overwhelmed in some situations. Now gets regularly overwhelmed unless you have very good recovery options. I think that's a huge nerf right here. It's hard to say how big of a deal this is. That was in my mind, that was one of the Crusader's only remaining roles in regular gameplay, was a frontline stress healer, so I could bring different back rank damage dealers. I find it really painful, this nerf. Stalling skills listed there. Unshakable leader cost down from 3 to 2. It's a self buff that's a camping buff. I mean, it's fine. That's a nice little buff. 2 is manageable. You often fit that in now. Stand tall cost from 4 to 3. Also a nice one. This is the one that removes mortality debuffs. As a whole, slight buff to Crusader. Kind of weird nerfs on Inspiring Cry and Bulwark of Faith. And the Inspiring Cry is really, really noticeable. The things I was using the Crusader for are mostly stress healing, and now that's been nerfed even harder. Now, granted, all stress healing is nerfed, but this one feels particularly brutal. The Jester still does his role as a stress healer, no problem. The Crusader, a lot less able to do that. All right, Grave Robber. Crit effect plus 10 dodge, sure. I am just fine with the dodge in some scenarios. More dodge for free is one of these ones, and similar to more protection for free. I don't mind it whatsoever, or more damage for free. It doesn't have any secondary things that have to trigger to make it useful. So as long as you're not running a bunch of minus dodge items on this Grave Robber, you're actually getting a benefit from this. I'm fine with that. Damage. Nerfs to damage. Seems really unnecessary on the Grave Robber. Grave Robber was not a good damage dealer before, and is a worse damage dealer now. Great. Crit's gone up. Sure, everyone's crit's gone up. Pick to the face has been changed. It's now less damage, less accuracy, less crit, but ignores protection. I find it useful. The ignore protection ability is fairly good. It's very situational, but it's fairly good as a whole. I like the pick to the face changes. It's an actual increase. Lunge got a huge fucking nerf. Not excited about that at all. It doesn't say it here. Maybe it didn't get a nerf. I thought that the overall damage on lunge modifier went down, but maybe I'm misremembering that. If it's just the extra damage buff to blighted, it probably doesn't matter 99% of the time. There's not really good comps where you're applying a blight and then lunging, but maybe. But my recollection was lunge had a higher base damage than it does now, but perhaps I'm just imagining that. It is possible. Flashing daggers, crit from 567 to minus 543. It must be to 54321, and it must be going the other way. Either way, it's a crit nerf. It's hard to read if that is what those actual numbers represent. Shadow Fade, it got nerfed here. The fact you could only do it a limited number of times, and the fact that it's basically fucking terrible. It gives you a buff that is equal to as if you had attacked already. Moves you back to and makes you invisible. It's an emergency oh shit thing that probably isn't worth using. It's almost never worth running. It's weird because it's a buffing skill that doesn't really buff you. So it's like a survival thing, but it's a survival thing you have to use on your turn after you've acted, which means that all the shit that's already basically killed you has already happened. So I think very little of the Shadow Fade. Thrown Dagger had a nerf in damage. Crit stayed basically the same, very slight increases at the high end of that. Now does bonus damage to blighted. We don't care. No longer buffs accuracy on a miss. It's unfortunate. And the mark damage bonus from 25 to all the way to 40. Hypothetically, these are buffs to this, but honestly, it's not. The minus 10% damage mod is not worth any of these buffs. I don't care about these buffs. Damage versus a blighted target is such a weird and unuseful ability, and damage versus marked targets, especially on the Grave Robber, really don't excite me whatsoever either. So really what I see here is I see a small crit buff, or crit buff, very small, at the cost of 10% consistent damage, which I'm not okay with that trade-off. Don't like it at all. Really not excited about the Grave Robber. Poison darts no longer guaranteed on new grave robbers. I didn't know that was a thing. Damage mod from -90 to -60. That's a big buff in actual upfront damage. Now usable in rank 2. 2, 3, 4 was 3, 4. That's a buff. Crit from 5, 6, 7 to all the way up to 7.5 to 11. That's a big buff in terms of crit chance. Blight from 3, 4 to 2, 3. So a slight nerf in the blight. I don't use poison darts all that much. I suppose, especially now, and additionally now that she has a protection ignore already on pick to the face, it seems even less likely I'll be using poison darts. I mean, if poison darts is a skill you use, this is a huge buff to poison darts. I don't use poison darts as a skill, so it doesn't seem like much of a buff at all to me, but maybe you'll get more use out of it. Toxin Trickery, usable once per battle, now cures plus 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Dodge, now cures, it gives that rather. An additional speed, it was up to 20, it's now, so it's reduced dodge and reduced speed. So it's a nerf, but it's now per battle as opposed to per 3 rounds. Probably still not playable, quite honestly. It's weird to give a cure ability that has a 1 per fight thing. It seems to be trying to do 2 things at once that don't really synergize. Either I'm buffing myself for speed and dodge for the battle, which is, especially in endless mode, something you really might care about, or I'm curing. And if I'm curing, I want to be able to use this reactively to some sort of nasty blight. I don't really like this ability either. I don't think it's very good. You might be able to get away with this in some sort of dodge comp where that might be more useful to have a 13 on-demand 13 dodge buff. But I also don't really like the extra speed on the Grave Robber. If you're starting to go this fast, +4 on probably the fastest character in the game, or one of the very fastest characters in the game, you're probably outrunning your healer. So you're probably doing something like you go first, your whole round happens, the enemies hit you, they focus your Grave Robber randomly, hit her 2 or 3 times, put a blight on her, and then she goes first before the healer because she's way too fast, even with the Death's Door debuff for speed, and she dies. And that happens all the fucking time with Grave Robbers. I'm not very excited about buffing the Grave Robber speed disproportionately. If you're buffing the whole team's speed and your healer speed going up, that's fine. But if you're buffing the Grave Robber speed individually, really don't like it whatsoever. Stuff box cost increased from 2 to 3. Random nerf on Disease Cure. Don't know why. Disease Cure is really good, sure, but did it need to be nerfed? I don't think so. And the scouting chance from 30 to 20. Okay, I'm okay with the overall scouting buff nerfs. As a whole, the Grave Robber didn't get any more exciting to me and got even more bizarrely weighted to doing strange things. Now I need to blight things to get full damage out of my Grave Robber, or preferably blight and mark them. But my damage range is garbage, and my unpredictability of my damage is garbage, and my consistent damage is garbage, and it's a super weak chassis in terms of staying alive, and bad for its speed relative to my heal, etc. It's probably at this point, not counting the Antiquarian, it's my least favorite class in the game because it just doesn't do any of the things I need it to do when I need to do it, and is a massive liability to have on my team. All right, Hellion. Crit effect, 33% damage versus bleeding. Not very useful. Don't use a lot of bleeding attacks around the Hellion. Her bleed attacks have exhaust elements built into them or are otherwise weaker. Maybe you can find a comp where this is useful, but with the Flagellant nerf and Hellion wanting to be in position 1 already, you're starting to have weird comps if you bring in Hellion Flagellant. Houndmaster has bleeds, but the bleeds aren't really what you use Houndmaster for. Is often either a stress healer, back rank damage dealer, or stunner. And yeah, sometimes the back rank damage dealer applies the bleed, but oftentimes it doesn't. It's just awkward to use. It's another one of these abilities that isn't reliable enough for me to care about. Crit from 2, 3, 4 to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sure. Wicked Hack, crit increase. Iron Swan, crit increase. Barbaric Yop, it's now usable 3 times per battle. Stun chance reduced, so now it only goes to 150. 150 is now a strong stun. Average stun 140, strong stun 150, weak stun like 130 is about where they end up with right now. So this is still a strong stun, but it's just not as strong as it was. Usable 3 times per battle, I think is fine. It means you can't stall quite as well with it, but they're trying to nerf stalling, and I agree that stalling needs a nerf, so I'm fine with that. Yop is still pretty damn good. If it bleeds, crit gone up very slightly. Breakthrough damage mod, it's a little tiny bit more damage, a little tiny bit more crit. Can't be used in the front rank, but it can be used in 2, 3, 4. Has smaller exhaust than normal, sure. Adrenaline rush, accuracy buffs up a little bit higher. Really, that's such a minimal change. Who cares? And heal got slightly nerfed. Too bad. The heal was the best part of that. The heal and the bleed cure was the best part of it. I really don't care about the accuracy or damage buffs off Adrenaline Rush. They're just kind of like extra icing on the cake for when you're removing a very nasty blight or healing yourself off Death's Door. Bleed Out got really, really nerfed just because of the way they reworked Exhaust. Which is too bad. Bleed Out used to be fun to spam that. When you knew you were walking into a boss fight, you could spam that with herbs and just remove that over and over again, and I'm pretty sure that's been changed. Battle Trance got slight increases. Or rather, excuse me, removed accuracy, which I guess is a debuff, but it's now just damage and in rank 1 versus not rank 1. And Sharpened Spear got an increase over here. As a whole, not much in the way that changes the Hellion past just kind of updating her for the patch. I wish her crit effect was a little bit more reasonable, and other than that, she's basically as strong or as weak as she was before, with almost no changes in my opinion. Although the exhaust stuff does not work as it used to anymore, which is a bit awkward. Highwayman. Crit effect, +2 speed, another one of these ones that is, as a whole, pretty damn useful, especially on the Highwayman, who is a medium speed class, who really wants to be high speed, because that allows him to kill all the stuff that's going to cause you problems before they get to go. I really, really, really like that on the Highwayman. I believe you can trigger that off Riposte as well, which means that he might be one of those classes that actually gets to take advantage of that for 2 rounds instead of 1 round, which is pretty damn cool, because you can get this buff on an enemy turn. So, and it doesn't remove off of you to the end of your turn, so you can get 2 rounds of that. It's pretty cool. Crit increase, great. That's just base character crit increase, and then there's additional skill increase of crits on Wicked Slice, which is one of the good ones. That's fine. Pistol Shot got better. The damage reduction got reduced, which is a damage increase overall. Crit increased. Mark damage increased. Point Blank Shot got higher crit. Grape Shot Blast got nerfed in accuracy, buffed in damage, slightly nerfed in crit, and now gives a debuff. Yeah, I almost never use this ability, and nothing of those changes makes me want to use that anymore. I don't think those are at all relevant, those changes. Duelist Advance, accuracy from 85 to 90 is a buff. Crit from 2 to 4 to 5 to 9 is a buff. Can no longer trigger target rank 4 is a huge nerf. It's really unfortunate. Duelist Advance is one of my favorite opening moves on the Highwayman, which is to set up your riposte. The nerf to position 4 was very noticeable as I played it. Yeah. Tracking Shot, crit from 0001 to 0.5.51, who cares? Crit damage buff from 9 to 10, very, very small increases. Tracking Shot still remains pretty decent in endless mode and pretty not decent in anything except boss fights, where it's actually fairly good. Open Vein, slight damage increases, no stalling moves, and Clean Gun crit from 5 to 8. As a whole, I think these are Highwayman buffs. I think the crit effect is particularly relevant on the Highwayman. Highwayman's crit a lot because they get a lot of attacks per round with Riposte. The only real, and Pistol Shot getting a buff is a really big thing. All crit damage for them is good. The only big nerf here was a Duelist Advance, not being able to hit rank 4 anymore. As a whole, I really like Highwaymen at the moment. I think they have a pretty good chance of being a useful damage dealer that has a lot of versatility in where it can hit and how it can hit in most of my non-endless dungeon runs. I haven't found a comp that uses them well in the endless dungeons yet, but I might be able to at some point, because they have a per fight buff, which is really, really strong in the endless dungeon mode. I think this is a nice set of buffs for Highwaymen, which by the way is an indirect nerf to the Grave Robber, since the Highwaymen and the Grave Robber play very, very similar roles, and the Highwayman just does everything the Grave Robber does better except curing diseases, which is kind of unfortunate. Houndmaster got the shit nerfed out of him. Crit effect, plus 20% bleed chance. That's not a terrible one. Every time they attack with their primary attack, they do try to apply bleeds. This is a passive ability that basically helps me most of the times I'm going to use it. I don't hate that, but it's also a fairly minor bleed, so it doesn't have a lot of impact. I don't like it very much, but it's okay. It's better than the Hellion's one. It's better than plus damage versus a bleeding target, in my opinion. It just makes you more consistent, which is something I extremely value in my heroes. Crit got a slight increase. Hound's Rush crit got a slight decrease, actually a fairly significant decrease. Not that anyone cared to. Well, Hound's Rush is his basic target, right? So that's, yeah, that's actually fairly significant. -5% crit on starting Hound's Rush all the way up to -3% crit on Hound's Rush. I guess that's a slight nerf in his crit damage as opposed to everybody else getting a slight buff in crit. It's kind of weird. Hound's Harry modifier got changed, so it's a little bit more upfront damage, a little bit more bleed, a little bit less crit. Sure, it's fine. Not really much of a change. You're only going to use Hound's Harry pretty much only on the flesh. It's really not relevant most of the time. Otherwise, there's better skills to be using. Cry Havoc, Stress Heal nerfed. Stress Heal chance now scales up to 74%. I haven't, that looks, I mean, it used to cap be 66 all the way across. So this is probably almost the same stress healing, which is weird because Crusader got really heavily nerfed in stress healing. It doesn't look like the Hound did very much. Guard Dog, the amount of dodge got nerfed. Lick Wounds, the heal got nerfed. Blackjack, the stun chance got massively reduced. It's now scales up to only 150, so it's still one of the highest percentage stuns in the game, and also one of the best stuns in the game because it can target position 1, 2, or 3 from position 1 or 2, which is really, really good for a frontline stun chance. But it did get a slight nerf percentage, and other nerf to his scouting stuff. Don't really like this as a whole for the Hound. I mean, how do I say this? The Hound was too strong. So these nerfs aren't so bad that you can't use the Hound. The Hound does basically what it did before. It just does it all a little bit worse than it used to. So still an extremely playable, extremely powerful character. Feels bad to have a character that used to be amazing now be just good. Probably needed for balance, but you notice it when you're playing it. You're like, oh, not quite as good as it used to be. Jester. Crit effect plus 40% stress healing done. I really like. I do use the Jester to stress heal constantly. 40% stress healing is a lot. It's a 3-round buff as opposed to a 2-round buff, which means you get to use it twice as opposed to once for every other class. Kind of a big deal. Crit has gone slightly down. Sure, I guess. I don't use the Jester to attack all that often. I'm mostly stress healing, so that's fine. Dirk Stab now ignores guard. I've been playing with the Jester. I don't know how many hours I've had post-patch with the Jester, and I'd totally forgotten it ignores guard. I guess that's okay, but most of the creatures, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's a buff. I'll take it. I'm happy with that. I used Dirk Stab. I just totally forgot I actually had done that. Crit went up. Great. Harvest, crit went up. Sure. Now Harvest affects Finale. That's great. Finale got changed quite a lot. You can now use it for 1 or 2, and it hits all positions instead of 1, 2, or 3, but it also applies a massive shitty debuff to you, and this buff stays on you for the rest of the battle, and it can't be removed with herbs. And the buff is minus 25 dodge, minus speed, and plus 100% stress. And it's a really big deal. So they really want Finale to be used last. Everything charges up Finale now. And Finale's really good. Its damage numbers are good. Its crit numbers are really good. But it gives you a really, really shitty thing. I think this is fairly good to use in non-endless mode and pretty crap to use in endless mode. The not being able to remove the debuff is kind of a big deal. And they've gone back and forth. Color of Madness first came out. You could still remove the debuff with herbs. A little bit later, that got patched out again. Now you can't remove the debuff with herbs. Yeah. I don't really want my Jesters moving forward and then finaling at the end of the fight, because I generally want at the end of the fight my Jesters to be stress healing, but it can be nice. Sometimes it is better to just remove a target than it is to give them another attack, even when that could be stress healing. So if you're ever shuffled with the Jester, this is a nice ability to put you back into the place you want to be in, but that debuff is really problematic, especially if you're fighting bosses that have big stress attacks or something like that. I actually don't use Finale most of the time on my Jester anymore. I'm up to Dirk Stab, Slice Off, the AoE group buff, and the stress healing. So I think this is enough of a nerf, and Finale's been nerfed a number of times now that I pretty much don't ever use it anymore. But it is an interesting way to try to get people to use it as they want it, because people were using it as upfront damage, because upfront damage is just better. Solo. No longer debuffs enemies, now marks the Jester and buffs dodge by 20 to 30 and speed by 7. Yeah, I don't really want really fast characters with very small amounts of HP who are dodge based, because that's a really quick way to die to a crit and followed by a blight or a bleed. I never use Solo. It's usable only twice per battle. It can only be used in 3-4 now, and it gives you a huge buff and a mark. So you're supposed to be dodge tanking with a super fragile character with a ton of dodge and going first, which means if you ever miss your dodges, you're fucked. I think this is another suicide skill. There's a Flagellant item that is essentially you equip this item and your Flagellant dies every time he's low, and this is the same. This is if you really hate a particular Jester and you just want him off your roster and you want him to die in combat and really fuck yourself by adding to the number of deaths in your run through, you should run solo. Huge nerf on that ability. Not that the initial ability was any good. Slice off, crit increase, sure, that's useful. Inspiring Tombs, stress heals went from 10 to 15 to 8 to 12. It's a noticeable difference. This is what I was talking about, the stress healing nerf. So weird that the Houndmaster really didn't get that much of a nerf, but the Jester did and the Crusader did. Finale build up. Pretty much everything feeds into Finale now, including Inspiring Tune and Battle Ballad and everything else. And Tiger's Eye crit from 5 to 8 is pretty non-meaningful. It's just part of the overall scaling on that. Jester is still the best stress healer out there. Best single target stress healer for sure, and arguably the best stress healer. The way that crit has happened too, the crit and accuracy buffs are a lot more useful than they used to be, especially on endless mode. The Leper really shines on endless mode for that consistency in stress healing, the consistency in your team hitting things with the accuracy buffs. Really, really strong class right now. Even with these changes, it's just Finale and Solo are pretty much out of the repertoire for the Jester, in my opinion. All right, Leper. Crit effect 10 accuracy. It's a weird buff, this one. It's not as good as a pure damage buff. So the accuracy buff is, if you itemized your Leper to be dealing with the enemy's accuracy already, the accuracy buff applies nothing. But if the Leper is debuffed or fighting guys with exceptionally high dodge or something like that, the buff's useful. I'm of a mixed mind of this one. I don't hate this buff, but I also don't love it. I think I'd prefer something more consistent, but it's a Leper and the Leper's miss. So if you can't itemize that high, and they keep nerfing accuracy items, they nerfed accuracy items when this patch came out, and then they nerfed them again in a recent patch where the focus ring got another nerf. So that accuracy buff I might be giving that more value than I would otherwise. Crit increased, chop crit increased, hue crit increased, purge. Damage mod from -90 to -40 is a big difference, but this is still that knockback move that doesn't have a lot of point. Now usable only in rank 1. Now buffs accuracy by 5 for 4 rounds. I don't think that's worth having on your bar. The Leper has too many other decent skills to have on your bar for that. Revenge is now a battle-long buff that gives you a large amount of crits and accuracy. These are just the changes, I guess. It gives you crit accuracy and damage, right? So it's a pretty damn big buff. I think it's probably worth it for specific boss fights. I probably don't think it's worth it in regular everyday corridor fights. And in endless mode, I think it's really tempting to use it, but I think it's one of the few ways you can actually lose endless mode with the right comp, is that you get bursted down with this plus 25% damage taken. I like it, but I'm not sure it's good. I like the options. I wish I could use it in non-endless mode play, but it's just too slow in non-endless mode play. Withstand has been changed. This is now a battle long buff, so it stays for the entire of the battle. It gives you 30 resist buffs, and also gives you 30% protection, which is just amazing. That skill is so good. Probably not usable in corridor fights again, but definitely usable in boss fights, and amazingly good in endless mode. I really like Withstand. I think it's probably one of the best skills in the game right now, which is crazy. Solemnity, now they've combined. The Jester used to have a stress heal that gave protection, I think, and then a healing that gave resist. Now the protection buff and the resist buff are once per battle thing, and the heal is now a stress heal and a heal. It's a super big buff to the Leper's Solemnity ability. Hilariously, I don't keep this on my bar during endless mode, but I think I probably would keep this on my bar during just corridor fights. This allows you to get stress healing on tempo. It allows you to get emergency healing when need be. It's just a really good recovery skill that does two things that are important together. It's a really good skill now. Intimidate now buffs the Leper's speed for 4 rounds. Sure. I mean, Leper speed's a good thing. You want that guy going first when you can. Leper is... We're going to talk a lot about this when I do the endless mode video. But right now, people have been all over my YouTube comments for how good is the Leper, being like, the Leper's really good now. You need to retract all your previous statements about it. And all over my YouTube videos with, how come you're using the Leper? You shit on him so hard. Yeah, the Leper is still shit, guys. He still doesn't do anything you need him to do in regular mode. It just turns out that they built a game mode that totally changed how the game is played in that game mode. And in that new game mode, front rank AoE damage and high front rank damage is actually really useful. And the Leper does just fine when those are your conditions. So the Leper now has a bunch of battle length buffs in a new game mode where battles are no longer 4 enemies and now are like 20 enemies, and in a game mode where you need AoE to kill the crystals and front rank damage is generally as good as back rank damage in this game mode, and blah blah blah. Oh, and consistency is prime, and he's got a huge resist buff that makes the consistency of enemy damage reduced as well as the consistency of enemy debuffs reduced, and 2 party long buffs. It turns out those things make the character fairly decent in this game mode. The Leper itself, I don't think has changed very much. These are good buffs, but they don't address any of the fundamental problems with the Leper in non-endless mode. He still doesn't do any sort of reliable or useful damage to the back ranks. He still is fucked if he gets shuffled, and scouting actually got nerfed. He doesn't have any of the things we care about in a damage dealer for non-endless mode. So I'm loving that I can use the Lepers. It's fun. They have amazing camping skills, amazing party skills, and I'm loving that the endless mode is basically tailored to bring a Leper to. But I don't think that means the Leper's any better. I think that means the environment we're playing in has changed entirely. So we'll talk about it more when we do the endless mode game video. Okay, Man-at-Arms. Crit effect, minus 33% stress for 3 rounds, so it's a longer buff in the same way the Jester's is a longer buff, so you get a couple more rounds out of it. Man-at-Arms also has riposte possibilities, so sometimes you'll actually get this for 3 rounds, not just 2 rounds. So you can get a very long buff out of that. Minus stress is one of those ones I really like. It's like protection, for example, which is just a lot of the times it's not going to matter, but some of the times it's going to be really useful, and it's not something you have to activate. I quite like that. I know some of you are going to be like, but Filthy, you're being hypocritical. You're saying that things like the mark debuffs, which are some of the times useful and a lot of times not useful, are bad, but you're saying the crit effect buffs like this one, which are some of the times useful but a lot of times not very useful, are good. How come? Because it's a different type of thing. The other one, I'm having to actively take moves that aren't moves that I would wanting to be making most of the time to set up to activate these buffs. So in other words, the condition where I get those buffs to work are rarely the conditions I want to play, where this one is basically enemy actions that sometimes but don't always target me are less good, and I don't have to do anything to set that up. So I hope that distinction makes it a little bit clearer. But I like this buff. I think that's a cool buff. Not that the Man-at-Arms crits for shit, but still, potentially. Stun and move resist from 50% to 40%. That's too bad. He was very tanky, and now it's a little bit less tanky in terms of his resistances to being pushed around. Damage nerfed. That's too bad. He already had low damage. Crit slight increase, but barely. Small increase on his crush. Rampart got fucking massively nerfed. Can no longer hit rank 3. A rank 1-2 stunner is a lot worse than a rank 1-2-3 stunner. Slight increase in crit on that, but who cares? Bellow lost any of its damage. Lost the ability to crit. Now can't be. Is now usable everywhere. So I can bellow from position 4, which is, if you ever run the position 4 Man-at-Arms buffer, is okay. And now applies plus 5% crits received if marked debuff. This is a joke of a debuff, but whatever. Overall, big negative changes to Bellow. Bellow was great for fishing for stress heals, and great for doing like 1 damage to the back rank style thing while applying a useful debuff to all surviving enemies. Bellow is still really solid. It's still playable in corridors, but it's worse than it was before with these changes. Defender protection buff got nerfed by a lot. Now only protects for 30%. Retribution got crit increases. Command now got slightly worse accuracy, slightly more crit, and also gives plus damage when guarded. This is hard to use. If you're spamming buffs and debuffs on him, it's hard to also be guarding. You tend to want to get your retribution up. You tend to want to keep 1 to 2 levels of this buff up, and occasionally you want to be bellowing. So it's hard to go any guarding in that sequence. But this ability is still fairly interesting, especially in endless mode where there's stuff to be said about having a group accuracy buff that you refresh constantly. I don't think I'd play this in corridors still in regular game mode, but maybe. Bolster. Buffs are now battle long, which is a really cool change. I like all of the battle long buffs. I think they're useful versus boss fights and useful in endless mode and are a very, very cool idea. It makes the downside of casting them a lot less if you're casting them once every 7 or 8 rounds or 5 or 6 rounds compared to once every 2 or 3 rounds. That's a big deal. Buffs got changed. A slight dodge increase, which is nice. No longer gives speed, which is too bad, but now gives up to minus 20% stress, which is amazing for any of the endless mode stuff again in boss fights. So I really like that. That's probably going to be, I'm probably going to be seeing Bolster see some play versus bosses. Probably what it ends up looking like is Crush, Rampart, Bellow, and Bolster and just normal modes with maybe getting Defend in there instead. His camping stuff, maintain equipment protection buff from 10 to 15%. No one cares. Crit from 3 to 5 on tactics. That's just part of the overall crit buff for everyone. Dodge buff replaced with plus 10 accuracy on instruction. That's fine. Weapons practice crit from 5 to 8. His camping buffs are still very solid. Sometimes it's hard to use because there are a lot of kind of win more buffs as opposed to survive the stress buffs or deal with the shit that's already afflicting you. But they're often really good for bosses with win more buffs, right? You go in and you're like, I don't care what my end stress is on this fight. I just want the maximum damage and crit to deal with this very difficult boss as soon as possible. And he still does that well. Overall, I think a nerf to the Man-at-Arms and a pretty noticeable nerf. But Man-at-Arms, again, was one of the best classes in the game. He's still playable after these nerfs, and he actually has his buff side, which was pretty much never used, now has enough incentives to potentially be used in some of either the new game modes or some of the boss fights, which I like. So I'm okay with those changes, but definitely a nerf to the Man-at-Arms as a whole, but maybe opening up some new opportunities. Okay, Occultist. Crit effects plus 25% healing done for 3 rounds. Sure. The problem is the percent modifier doesn't fucking deal with the fact that the big problem with the Occultist is inconsistent healing. So if I have 25% extra healing on 1, hooray. Or 25% extra healing on 0, you know, like that doesn't do anything. Like if that was like, imagine his crit effect was plus 3 healing on all heals. So now the 0, so your floor goes from 0 to 3. Imagine how much better that would be. So Occultist crits a lot, but I don't know that the healing done is that relevant to me. Crit up a little bit. Sack stab crit up very slightly. Abyssal artillery damage mod slightly lower. Slightly less crits. Slightly less damage to Eldritch. Don't know that Abyssal artillery was so strong that it needed to be nerfed. It was okay situationally, but sure. Weakening curse is gone from what it used to do. Not true. Used to just be better at doing what it used to do. So it now applies a protection and a damage debuff as opposed to pure damage debuff to the enemy. I think it's worse. The times you were going to be using this was spamming it on like the Prophet or there's another boss I like to spam it on, Swine Lord, that I'm not so excited about anymore. I think this is probably bad enough now that I'm not using it. If this weakening curse also applied a mark so that basically the Occultist could be marking dodge or marking protection, maybe you could find a way to make a mark comp work with it, but even then mark comps are pretty weak. I don't like this change. It felt like a nerf to a skill that I only used in a couple boss fights. Vulnerability Hex crit up a little bit, sure. Hands from the Abyss crit up a little tiny bit, sure. That's cool. This is one of the best stuns remaining in the game. I believe it's 150% stun still, and it's a highest crit stun out there, and it hits position 1 to 3. Too bad position 2 Occultist isn't that appealing overall, but I do love the stun. Demon's Pull, very slight increase in chance. These are the stalling moves. Dark Ritual cost from 4 to 3. Very slight buffs to the Occultist, but I don't think the Occultist is good enough to play over the Vestal still. So same problem as before. No real change there. Plague Doctor, crit effect plus 20% blight chance. That's fine. That's consistency. I like consistency. The Plague Doctor blights a lot. Crit went slightly up. Dodge went slightly down. Noxious Blast, crit went up. Blight skill ability went up. And now applies an accuracy debuff. These are buffs to the Noxious Blast. Noxious Blast was good before. It's great now. Plague Grenade, small crit chance increase. Blinding Gas restricted to 3 times per battle. I think that's fine. I never ever use Blinding Gas more than 3 times in a battle anyway, so that's totally fine. Incision up to 9% crit. No one cares. Incision's garbage. Emboldening Vapors are now a battle long buff that give damage and speed. This is very, very cool in endless mode. Okay in boss fights and useless in corridor fights. Throwing it out there. Disorienting Blast can no longer crit. That's a big nerf because you use this skill a lot, and it was nice to get stress healing off that. Can no longer be used in rank 1, 2, 3, 4 only, so Plague Doctor's in a lot of trouble if he gets cycled to position 1, but overall not that big of a deal. And Leeches cost from 2 to 3, so removing diseases is more expensive. I don't like the increase in cost of removing diseases. I think the disease cure abilities were good, but situationally good and were cool, and they don't need to be nerfed. Overall, Plague Doctor still remains super strong. I don't think any of these nerfs hurt her, and I think many of the buffs are just nice quality of life buffs or just otherwise keeping the crit scaling the same. All right, Vestal. 25% healing done for the next 2 rounds is great on a Vestal. That's an ability that we're going to use. Bleed resist got slightly nerfed, too bad. Damage got nerfed by a fair chunk, also too bad. Crit went very slightly up. Mace Bash, we can just stop reading. We don't use Mace Bash. Judgment, accuracy up. Damage mod down. Crits to 9%, heals from 345 to 456. That's still very playable. What you want Judgment for is the consistent hitting, so getting the accuracy boost there is nice. The damage mod's a little bit problematic, but not majorly so. I like Judgment. It's one of her best skills. I use it all the time. I think it's still very usable. Dazzling Light was 2-3-4 and now 3-4. Blah. Don't really care. Don't use that very often. I've tried Illumination on her, but still not something I'm very excited about. Divine Grace got slightly upped. Don't know why. Maybe to offset the enemy damage, but I didn't see the Occultist getting any plus healing. It seems weird to buff the Vestal's healing. Same with Divine Comfort. Also got buffed. Again, I assume to offset enemy crit chance, but where are my Occultist healer buffs? It feels like it's almost like Red Hook acknowledging there's only one healer in the game, and that healer is the Vestal. If you want to run the Occultist and play with your RNG, you're welcome to do it, but we're not going to make it easier for you. Really weird to see healing buffs on the only healer that matters. Illumination now ignores and removes stealth, can no longer crit, and damage bonus from -50 to -75. I've used this skill a couple times. It's just worse. The bar on the Vestal remains exactly the same for me. It's her nuke, her healing nuke, her regular heal, her AoE heal, and her stun. And everything else, there just isn't room for her at all. Position 2 Vestals were always mediocre. They remain mediocre. I don't think her attack skills from position 2 are worth moving her to position 2 for. And prey cost decrease, which is a buff. So honestly, very slight damage debuffs on the Vestal, but a bunch of healing buffs. Like Vestal got better, which is weird because it was one of the classes that needed a nerf but didn't get it. So not super thrilled about those changes. I'm not going to go through the trinket changes here. As a whole, accuracy got nerfed, crit got buffed, and a lot of items got changed around. I'm mostly pretty pleased with the item changes. I think most of them were necessary. Although with the caveat of I don't think accuracy should be debuffed to the point where we're now having inconsistent rolls, because it removes part of the things players can do to deal with shitty RNG strings. Now you're at the mercy of shitty RNG strings more so than you were before, which I don't like. Couple quirk changes, a bunch of new quirks. The new quirks are really fun. A lot of them are really good. I might at some point touch on those rather. Okay. Monster changes, I don't think we're going to lot on to now either. A lot of them got crit buffs as a whole. Don't think that's necessary to read through. You can read those on your own. Monsters haven't changed massively that I've seen. And then Flagellant changes. Let's talk about that. Flagellant got the shit nerfed out of them. Unnecessarily, I thought. I thought they were strong, maybe a little too strong, but I think the nerfs they had were brutal. So the crit effect of plus 20% bleed chance is really good. Flagellant uses bleeds. Pretty much every one of their attacks has bleed, so getting consistency to that is good in the same way it is for the Plague Doctor. Crit went up very slightly. Buff applies now when under 40% rather than 38. Buffs now apply when under 40% rather than 38. That's pretty much irrelevant. I don't care about the Flagellant buffs. But there are nerfs about that in a minute. We'll talk in a second. That's fine. Crit buff when HP below 40% from 3 to 8, sure. Punish can no longer target rank. This is the biggest change right here. The Flagellant used to be a good position 1-2 character that could do damage from 1 to 3 and have lots of healing if you got crit a lot, or if your party was taking a bunch of damage, or just the Flagellant was taking a bunch of damage. And now you can't hit position 1 through 3. So you're a 1-2 damage dealer, which is fucking useless. Position 1 and position 2 are left to the end. Like, maybe this will have some okayness in endless mode, but there's other reasons why endless mode is not real good on the Flagellant. We'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, that's a huge, huge nerf, punish not being able to hit position 3. Reign of Sorrows got a damage increase, a crit increase, and a bleed amount increase. This is now playable in a way that it wasn't before. This is his back rank damage. He can hit position 3-4 with this. It's playable, but not amazing. The damage is, the total damage dealt by this is a lot less than Punish in terms of single target damage. Clearly, it's an AoE skill that hits 2. This was better. I don't think good enough to offset the loss of Punish, but maybe. You might be able to force it to work as kind of mediocre damage versus the ranks you care about doing damage to. Exsanguinate, crit went up, usable 3 times per battle, and only under 40% HP instead of under 50% HP. And that is a surprisingly large nerf to only have access to 2 of your most powerful abilities, Exsanguinate and Redeem, under 40%. I really hate that nerf. It makes it harder to utilize the Flagellant's good healing abilities without dying, which you really don't want to fucking do. And usable 3 times per battle makes it painful to use in something like endless mode, where you're going to preferably want to use that a little bit more. 3 is probably enough. 2 starts to get really sketchy. So if you consistently run into issues on endless mode or something like that, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. This isn't relevant for the just regular corridor fights. He's probably nearly as good in regular corridor fights, except for the punished nerf, right? So if you can make Reign of Sorrows be enough, if you have enough of a damage dealer that the Flagellant plus 1 other attack from something can kill back ranks, then you might be all right. But I don't think it is. I think it makes it so it's 3 attacks as opposed to 2, which is kind of unpleasant. Okay, what else? Hot from 1-1-2-2-3 to 2-2-3-3-4. Sure, a buff to Reclaim. Endure got changed. It now heals for less stress. Self-stress increases stress for you, but goes down over. So now at the end, it used to be a skill that was never worth leveling. So now you get a more efficient return. You're curing 14 stress and taking 6 on your own. And it buffs the Flagellant's speed. I'm not sure I actually want a speed buff from the Flagellant, but maybe if you're stress healing with it. I don't think this is worth it still, because it's just not a particularly good use of your time. It tends to spread stress out more than really removing it, but maybe. I mean, maybe this replaces the Crusader as a front rank stress healer kind of, but I think not. I think it's probably still not worth running. I think your bar is going to end up looking like Punish, Reign of Sorrows, Exsanguinate, Redeem. There's not going to be room for Reclaim or Suffer, or excuse me, Reclaim or Endure or Suffer. And if you do find a spot in your bar for another one, it's probably going to be the heal. Suffer no longer gives protection, which is one of the best parts about it. And now gives minus 40% stress buff, not relevant. You don't want to cast something like that at the beginning. You want to cast this reactionary, and you want your stress buffs at the beginning of a fight. This is just not synergetic at all. Maybe versus a boss, I suppose, but even then, you're probably wanting the protection. Deathblow resist from 8% to 10%, very tinily removed. Very tiny change, doesn't really matter. Exhaust entirely rework can no longer be removed. Now does the following: minus 25% healing, minus 25% healing received. So kind of a big deal. Can no longer burn off debuffs for the Flagellant. Lashes Solace and Lashes Kiss from 2 to 3, that's a nerf. Lashes Cure cost from 1 to 2, that's a nerf. Stalling, a bunch of stalling moves. Overall, Flagellant got nerfed, and pretty heavily nerfed in a way that I think they're going to see a lot less play now. Which is really too bad because it was a fun class. Not going to look at the trinkets. We're not really going to look at the districts. The changes weren't very relevant. Monster stuff we're not going to worry about. Shieldbreaker. Flashback Horror from 23 to 20. Snake Guard riposte skill durations adjusted to mass new buff variation. Alright. Crit effect plus 15% protection. I like this on all the characters, but I particularly like it on a low HP character like the Shieldbreaker. Crit went up. Dodge scaling went very slightly up. It seems weird to even mention that. I mean, anyways, sure. Pierce, no longer target any rank, was 1-2. Can now target any rank. Okay. So I haven't really talked about the Shieldbreaker much, and I haven't done a guide video for her, for example. I found her decent in the most recent expansion, most recent DLC. I'm not sure she's going to be great on endless mode, but I love her consistency. I like expose. I like pierce. And I'm okay with impale, especially on endless mode for killing the crystals. I'm okay with serpent sway, and I'm okay with, I think it's puncture. So I like the fact that she ignores guard, can pop people out of stealth, ignores protection. Her damage seems a little bit weak, but I got a bunch of damage quirks on my most recent playthrough for her. And when her damage gets buffed out, super buffed, her damage and utility is, or her consistent damage gets high enough that it's pretty good. She can hit anywhere, ignores all of the things that prevent damage from being applied. That's pretty cool. She's a fucking liability to level up though. That her nightmares, her flashback nightmares are brutal. There's so much stress on those and it makes it so painful, and you can't even like just farm level 1s to get rid of it, because some are triggered at level 1, some are triggered at level 3, and some are triggered at level 5. And she's very fragile and squishy. I don't yet know. I haven't got a strong enough sense of if she's regularly playable or not, but I suspect she's right on the border again, and with some of the other nerfs, maybe. We'll have to see. She moves around a lot too, so there's probably some kind of unconventional comps you can think of, taking advantage of Highwaymen perhaps, or taking advantage of Crusaders, or something like that, where you can probably get more attacks than you otherwise would at high value, high damage attacks that require positioning changes. But even that's not maybe that likely, since a lot of the times I'm just spamming her attack that hits any position from position 1, 2, or from position 1 anyways, and not impale, the one that's direct target. I think it's pierce is what I'm thinking of. So okay, what else? I think that basically covers this. These are the main changes to this. Basically a lot of balanced stuff for individual classes. You're going to see those classes change from that. And I wanted to talk just briefly about this. So let me switch over. So over to here. So this is the upcoming patch. This is I think the first of the major patches for Color of Madness after the one we just talked about, which was the basic patch for this. It's a collector buff, which I think was necessary. The collector was basically a free $2,500 gem, so that's good. Upgraded monster brains, so virtues don't break them. That's good. Shadow Fade is no longer battle limited. Good, because as we talked about, Shadow Fade was a pile of shit. Drowned Captain move resist boosted to 200% because people were cheesing that fight. I'm fine with that. Where else? Updated Swinitar brain. That's so necessary. Swinitar spent so much of his time doing attacks no one cared about, which was great. Non-removable debuffs now have a unique icon. I think that's great because they keep changing which buffs are removable and not removable, so having that is a nice quality of life improvement. Flesh Eaters got toughened up, which is necessary. They were a joke of a 2-tile wide mob. Focus Ring got a nerf. It lost 1% crit and 5% accuracy. They call that a small nerf, but they don't know what they're. If they believe that's a small nerf, I think they're missing the point. The Focus Ring was the last of the good accuracy items that was available to everybody in all positions. There's still some like position 4 accuracy items like the Prophet's Eye that are really good or something like that. But the Focus Ring nerf is really big deal because accuracy is becoming harder and harder to get now. To the point where I'm probably going to start locking it as quirks for characters because it's so important, and I used to be able to itemize for it and I can't now. So that's a really big nerf, the Focus Ring, even though it says small nerf. Fixed to V-Wolf's bombs necessary. Update to brains, guarded monsters and corpses. Good. Any other big ones in here? Fixed to skill-based buffs that are about friendly skills that do not heal, aka musical quirk. I wondered if that was bugged. Okay. No, a lot of bug fixes there. Okay, so not a whole lot to talk about there, but I did want to point out the Focus Ring change and the AI changes. Okay, I know it can be a little bit dry going through patch notes, but there's no other really way to do it. There's a lot of things that get changed and a lot of commentary to be had about that. Trying to get some predictions out there. Had a lot of endless mode experience now. Really enjoying that DLC, although I will do a video directly about that. Hopefully this was fun and useful to you guys. I'm sure I will hear from you in the comments below. Try to keep it civil. I know some of you are very protective of the Leper, and you guys don't like it when I'm like, this class sucks, or this class is no good in this area, or this class doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and 25,000 of you want to tell me the best way, Filthy, is to attack the Pelagic Guardian first, and to hit him with non-armor piercing attacks over and over and over again, as everybody else stresses your group out to 200 stress, and then you just roll virtues, and that's the strategy with Lepers. Sure. If you guys want to play that way, that's certainly what you're welcome to do. I'm not going to tell you you can't do that, but what I am going to try to do is talk about what strategies work better, especially when you're looking at higher levels of difficulty and higher levels of play. Anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.